I took a deep breath, trying to control my emotions as I stood before the executive team of Quantum Innovations, the leading technology corporation where I had dedicated myself for the past 4 years. Project Helios, the most advanced artificial intelligence system I had spent 3 years developing, was finally ready for its crucial investor presentation. After countless long days and sleepless nights, it was time to reap the rewards. My name is Ava Mitchell, 34 years old, lead engineer, and the mind behind the entire design of Helios. I had poured my heart and soul into this project. Every line of code, every algorithm, every aspect of the system bore my mark. Today was supposed to be the day I proudly introduced it to the world. "Impressive, Ava," said Margaret Hayes, the company's CEO, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I was all too familiar with that expression, a sign that something was wrong. "However, we need to make a few adjustments before the investor presentation." A chill ran down my spine. "Adjustments?" I kept my voice calm, though my pulse had quickened. "The project has already passed all testing and evaluations. There's nothing left to change." Margaret waved a hand dismissively, as if what I said was irrelevant. "I'm not talking about the project, Ava." I glanced around the conference room. Everyone avoided my gaze. Some stared down at their documents while others pretended not to hear. Ryan Carter, the chief technology officer, frowned in confusion, clearly unaware of what was happening. "I don't understand," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I have led this project from day one." "Exactly." Margaret leaned forward, her tone sharp. "You've done a great job in development, but for the investor presentation, we need someone with more executive presence." Before I could respond, the conference room doors swung open. A young woman with striking blue eyes and an air of false confidence strode in. Sophie Hayes, Margaret's daughter. A surge of anger rose within me. Sophie had joined the company just 6 months ago as a special consultant, but everyone knew she was only here because of her mother. "Sophie will be presenting Project Helios," Margaret announced proudly. "She has an MBA from Harvard and the perfect image to attract investors." I clenched my fists under the table, struggling to keep my composure. "But she doesn't understand the technology behind this project. This isn't just a sales pitch, it's a groundbreaking AI innovation." "Which is why you'll still be involved, Ava," Sophie interjected, her tone dripping with condescension. "You'll serve as technical support." The room tilted. 3 years of my life reduced to technical support for someone who didn't even grasp the basics of my work? I lowered my voice, almost whispering, "This is ridiculous." Ryan abruptly stood up. "Ava is the brain behind this entire project. The investors need to understand the technology, not just hear a rehearsed presentation." Margaret turned to him, her tone sharp. "Ryan, this is an executive decision. It's not up for debate." I scanned the room again, waiting for someone to speak up, but no one did. They just looked down, silently accepting the decision. "You should be grateful," Sophie smirked. "Most companies don't even keep the technical team after a project is completed." And that was the moment I realized I had always known this might happen. I had always known that one day, Margaret would try to steal my work. I took a slow, deep breath, locking eyes with Margaret and Sophie. Did they think I was just an engineer with no power? They had no idea I had been preparing for this day all along. I tightened my grip, staring directly at them. Did they think they could push me aside and take everything I had built? They didn't know that I had anticipated this move. Calmly, I opened my laptop, my fingers gliding over the keyboard. The email was ready. I had written it months ago as a safeguard. Because I knew Margaret would never truly recognize my contributions. With a single click, I sent the email to the entire board of directors, senior advisors, and major shareholders of Quantum Innovations. The message wasn't just a complaint. It contained hard evidence of numerous shady transactions, including internal documents proving that Margaret had sold Helios's confidential data to rival companies. The moment I hit send, a series of notification chimes echoed throughout the room. Every executive in the room checked their phones and laptops. All eyes turned to Margaret. She picked up her phone, her expression shifting from confusion to shock, then to sheer panic. "What is this?" Margaret blurted out, her voice losing its usual composure. I stood there, unwavering. "It's just the truth." Ryan Carter, the chief technology officer, frowned as he read the email. He looked at me, then at Margaret. "Margaret, is this true?" No one in the room spoke. No one knew what to do as Margaret's entire scheme was exposed right before their eyes. The conference room door swung open again. Robert Lancaster, chairman of the board, entered with 2 lawyers. He was one of the most influential figures in the company, always maintaining a neutral stance. But I knew he had long harbored suspicions about Margaret. "I think we need to talk," Robert said in a calm but authoritative voice. Margaret froze for a moment, then quickly regained her composure. "Robert, I can explain. This is clearly a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding here, Margaret," I interrupted. "All the evidence is in the email. I have also sent copies to the company's legal team." Margaret stiffened. I could see real fear in her eyes. "You have no right to do this, Ava," Sophie suddenly spoke up, her voice laced with anger. "You're just an engineer." I smiled. "Actually, I have more power than you think." I slowly walked to the conference table and placed a folder down. "Has anyone ever wondered why I've remained so calm?" I looked at Margaret, then at Sophie. "Because I've been preparing for this moment for a long time." I opened the folder. On the first page was a stock transfer agreement. Before Henry Foster, the founder of Quantum Innovations, retired, he sold 40% of his shares to me. I emphasized every word, letting it sink in. Margaret turned pale. "You're lying." I chuckled. "You can check with the legal department if you'd like." Ryan, who now seemed to fully grasp what was happening, looked at me with newfound respect. "You own 40% of the shares? That means you have more authority than Margaret?" I nodded, and that's not all. I pulled out a USB drive, plugged it into the conference room projector, and a video began to play. On the screen, Henry Foster appeared. "Margaret, if you're watching this, it means you have gone too far. I warned you multiple times that this company is not your personal asset. You have abused your power, betrayed the trust of those who believed in you. That is why I entrusted the future of Quantum Innovations to Ava Mitchell." The room fell into absolute silence. Sophie stood motionless, her blue eyes filled with fear. "Mom, what is this?" Margaret clenched her fists, her gaze burning with fury as she looked at me. But this time, she had nowhere left to run. Robert Lancaster broke the silence. "Margaret Hayes, you are immediately suspended from your position. The board will convene an emergency meeting to officially remove you as CEO." Margaret collapsed into her chair. For the first time, she had completely lost control. I turned to Sophie, my voice calm but deliberate. "And you? Do you want to come clean, or should we expose everything about you to the compliance board?" Sophie opened her mouth, as if about to say something, but then fell silent, her face drained of all color. The emergency meeting took place shortly after, and as I had expected, the outcome was irreversible. Margaret was fired immediately and faced multiple financial misconduct charges. As I stepped out of the conference room, I felt a cool breeze brush past me. Ryan walked up beside me, admiration in his eyes. "How long have you been planning this?" I smiled. "A year," he nodded. "Impressive." I simply shrugged. Because this wasn't over. Margaret had been dethroned, but I knew there were still more secrets to uncover. And more importantly, I had to ensure that Quantum Innovations would never fall into the hands of people like her again. Margaret Hayes sat motionless, her face devoid of the power she once commanded. The board had just delivered their final decision. She was terminated immediately and would now face a formal investigation for financial fraud and abuse of power. Robert Lancaster's words, chairman of the board, still echoed throughout the conference room. We cannot allow someone who has exploited this company for personal gain to remain in power. Security entered the room, ready to escort Margaret out of Quantum Innovations headquarters. She stiffened, then suddenly stood up, her eyes filled with fury as she glared at me. "Do you think you can defeat me, Ava?" Her voice no longer carried its usual artificial composure. "You have no idea how many years I've spent building this empire." I remained calm. "Building?" I repeated, my gaze unwavering. "You didn't build anything, Margaret. You merely exploited and manipulated others to maintain control." She let out a bitter chuckle, but I could see the panic in her eyes. "You'll regret this, Ava." I crossed my arms, responding gently. "You can try, but that won't change the truth. The board's investigation will begin soon, and this time, there's nothing left for you to hide." I saw the flicker of realization in Margaret's eyes. She knew the battle was over. Security stepped forward, instructing her to leave. Margaret jerked her arm away from them, holding her head high as if she was still in control. But no one in the room saw her as a leader anymore. They only saw someone who had lost everything. The moment the conference room doors shut behind her, an eerie silence filled the air. I turned to Sophie Hayes, who had remained motionless, her face pale. "Sophie!" I called her name. She lifted her head, her gaze empty. "Do you have anything to say?" Sophie swallowed hard, her blue eyes darting around the room, now filled with scrutinizing stares. She knew she could no longer protect her mother. "My mother, she told me to do it." Sophie's voice grew quieter, almost a whisper. "I didn't think it would go this far." I met her eyes, my tone no longer cold like when confronting Margaret, but still firm. "You helped her deceive this entire company. Do you understand the consequences of that?" Sophie shuddered. For the first time, the arrogance had disappeared from her face. "I didn't have a choice," she murmured. But I shook my head. "There's always a choice, Sophie. You just took the easiest one." She bit her lip, as if battling her own thoughts. Her entire life, she had lived under her mother's shadow, following every command. And now, with Margaret fallen, she didn't know what to do next. Robert Lancaster looked at Sophie, his voice stern. "The board will be investigating everyone involved in this. If you cooperate, we may consider leniency." Sophie froze. Could she turn against her mother? Or would she cling to the false reality Margaret had built? She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. And then I saw a small but undeniable shift in her expression. She opened them again. "I will cooperate." Sophie spoke slowly but firmly. "I will tell the truth." 3 days later, I sat in my office, gazing out the window at the city below. The official investigation had begun. Margaret faced multiple charges, from financial fraud to abuse of power. And Sophie? She had indeed testified. Her statement became crucial evidence in strengthening the case. Today, Sophie stood before me. Gone were the designer dresses and the smug smile. She was just a young woman who had finally realized how deeply she had erred. "I know. There's no reason for you to forgive me." Sophie's voice trembled slightly. I just wanted to say that I truly regret everything." I studied her for a moment before nodding. "Regret means nothing if you don't do something to change." She swallowed hard, then pulled out a piece of paper and placed it on my desk. "This is a job application." I frowned, glancing at the document. Sophie was applying for a position at the company? "I want to start over," she said, her voice devoid of arrogance, only sincerity. "Not as Margaret Hayes' daughter, but as myself." I looked at her for a long moment. Sophie Hayes, the person who once stood before me and took credit for my work, was now asking for a chance to start over. I considered it, then pushed the application back toward her. "You can work in the marketing department at the lowest position," I stated clearly. "No privileges, no special treatment. If you want to prove yourself, start from the ground up." Sophie nodded. For the first time, I saw that she was no longer looking for shortcuts. I knew this wasn't the end, but at least it could be a new beginning. 3 months later, I stepped into the grand hall of Quantum Innovations, where the official launch of Project Helios was taking place. The massive LED screen displayed impressive numbers, reflecting the overwhelming market interest. The project had exceeded all expectations, becoming one of the greatest breakthroughs in artificial intelligence. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are not just unveiling a new technological product. We are reaffirming the core values of this company: innovation, integrity, and transparency. Applause filled the auditorium. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the recognition I had fought so hard to earn. Helios was more than just a product. It was proof of what a dedicated, ethical team could accomplish when free from manipulation and personal agendas. Ryan Carter, the Chief Technology Officer, stood beside me, his expression filled with pride. "Ava, you did it!" I looked over at the engineering team, the people who had fought alongside me for 3 years. We did it. I adjusted the microphone and continued my speech. Helios is not the achievement of one individual, but the result of a collective effort. A company cannot grow without trust and ethics. From this day forward, quantum innovations will not only lead in technology, but also in business integrity. The applause returned, louder this time. The shareholders, investors, and employees all understood the company had entered a new era. As I stepped down from the stage, Robert Lancaster was waiting. "That was an excellent speech, Ava." I nodded. "Thank you. But I think there's still unfinished business to take care of." Robert raised an eyebrow. "You mean Margaret?" I smiled, but my eyes were firm. Not long after her termination, Margaret underwent an official investigation for financial fraud and abuse of power. All the evidence my team and I had gathered left no room for denial. When the trial concluded, Margaret was placed under house arrest for 5 years in order to pay a significant financial settlement to the company. Once a woman who held immense power, she now had no influence left in the business world. My office door opened and Sophie stepped inside. She no longer carried the arrogance she once had. For the past 3 months, she had worked diligently in the marketing department with no privileges at all. "There's news about my mother," she said quietly. I looked up from my screen, waiting. "I heard that no one wants to work with her anymore. The people who once supported her have all turned their backs." I wasn't surprised. In business, losing credibility means losing everything. "And what about you?" I asked. "What do you think about all of this?" Sophie remained silent for a moment. "I used to think my mother was unstoppable, but now I realize she wasn't as powerful as I believed." I studied her, noticing a genuine shift. No more arrogance, no more entitlement. Just a person learning how to walk the right path. "You've been given a second chance," I said slowly. "Make sure you don't follow in your mother's footsteps." Sophie nodded. This time, I believed she truly understood. I turned back to my screen. Helios was thriving. Quantum Innovations had become a company built on transparency and integrity. Exactly the vision my team and I had fought for. I knew this wasn't the end. But it was the beginning of a new era. An era where people like Margaret Hayes would never have the chance to manipulate their way to the top again. 1 year later, I stepped into the office of Quantum Innovations, gazing through the transparent glass at the city skyline. Helios had become a resounding success, not just in terms of technology, but also in the values it brought to the field of artificial intelligence. But there was one thing I gradually realized. Success wasn't just about the numbers on a report. It was about the culture we were building. Quantum Innovations had once been a company riddled with manipulation, where those with power used connections to climb the ranks without true competence. But now, that had changed. Ryan Carter knocked lightly on my office door. "Ava, there's a new candidate who wants to meet you. I think you'll want to hear his story." I raised an eyebrow and motioned for him to bring the candidate in. A young man, around 24 years old, stepped inside, his eyes filled with determination. He extended his hand and I shook it, sensing the confidence of someone who had fought hard for this opportunity. "I'm Ethan Sullivan, software engineer." I nodded, glancing over his resume on my desk. An impressive background, but without the flashy names like Harvard or MIT. "Ethan, what made you choose Quantum Innovations?" I asked, curious about his real reason for being here. He gave a small smile, but his eyes reflected sincerity. Because here, talent and integrity matter more than connections. I looked directly at Ethan, feeling the weight of his words. That sentence took me back to my own past, when I was overlooked and pushed aside, simply because I didn't have the right status. "Where did you work before?" I asked. Ethan took a quiet breath, hesitated slightly, then replied. "I worked at a small startup. I developed an algorithm that optimized data processing, but someone else took credit for it." I wasn't surprised. This story was all too familiar. "They pushed you out?" I asked, my tone even. Ethan nodded. "I was just a young engineer without industry connections, but I didn't let that stop me from moving forward." I remained silent for a moment, then stood up. "Ethan, I want you to know one thing. Here, no one is overlooked just because they lack connections. If you do well, you will be recognized. No one can take your work away from you." He clenched his fist slightly, as if realizing he had finally found a place where he truly belonged. "Thank you, Ava. That's exactly why I want to work here." After Ethan left my office, I leaned back in my chair, reflecting on my own journey. I had once thought that Helios would be my greatest legacy, but now I understood that true legacy wasn't just about a product. It was about creating an environment where capable people were truly valued, where transparency was the foundation of the company. I thought of Lucas Dawson, the founder of Quantum Innovations, the man who entrusted me with his majority shares. I wondered, if he were here, would he be proud of what I had done? I stood up, stepped outside, and saw groups of young engineers engaged in passionate discussions in the company's open workspace. They weren't people relying on connections to advance. They were people who believed in hard work and integrity. I knew then, this was the legacy I wanted to leave behind. Ava Mitchell's story is not just a battle for justice, it is proof of the power of integrity and perseverance. In a world where power and connections sometimes overshadow true talent, Ava demonstrated that ethics and transparency are the true foundations of lasting success. In reality, many people have been pushed aside and denied credit for their work. But like Ava, if you believe in your worth and keep fighting, you can create change. What do you think of Ava Mitchell's story? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar in your career or life? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more inspiring stories about life, family, and valuable lessons.